Hello and welcome to another edition of the Silverbird Selection. Today I'm looking at a compilation that was released by Silverbird in 1990, so I think this was probably the very last release in Silverbird packaging. This compilation is called the Magnum Pack, and I bought this a couple of months ago. I was always intending to include it in another collection update video when I picked up some other games, but that's not happened up to now, so here we are. I'm going to review it now and talk about the 4 games that are included on this compilation. It's a pretty rare thing to find, I think. I've only seen a couple of copies of it on eBay since I started my collection a couple of years ago, and this copy luckily cost me £2.99, so while it is quite rare, I don't think it's particularly desirable. So let's take a look at the Magnum Pack in more detail. Okay, then let's take a look at the packaging for this compilation. As you can see, front cover has got the Silverbird logo repeated many times over on this silver background. It's got a red bit at the top saying Commodore 64, a red bit at the bottom saying Silverbird, and it says Magnum Pack with a bullet going through the word Magnum. It's pretty bland. Let's take a look at the spine. There we go, it's that same Magnum Pack logo, and the back cover, again, very bland. It's got that silver background and it's got a couple of screenshots for each of the 4 games that are included on this compilation. Turbo Boat Simulator, or Turbo Boat as it says there. BMX Kids, again, because that was featured on the 1, 2, 3 compilation. Pogo Stick Olympics, and finally Skateboard Joust, which I have to say 3 out of the 4 of those are some of the worst games released in the Silverbird range. Here's a cassette that the 4 games in this compilation came on. They're all on the one tape, even though it was a double cassette style packaging. And you can see it's very bland. It just says Magnum Pack Vol.1, see inlay for details. There's no other information on the tape at all. It's just basic grey text printed on a black tape. There's no Silverbird logos or anything like that on it. The back is just completely blank. So let's move on to the instructions, such that they are. Very bland packaging, again just the Silverbird logo repeated in the background there. You've got the instructions for the 4 games, very sort of abridged compared to the original packaging. So Turbo Boat, I'm not going to read all this stuff out, but basically it's got the name of the game, the overview of the game, and then some controls if necessary as well. This one's got loading instructions and keyboard controls. Then BMX Kids, same again. Loading instructions. I don't know why it's got the loading instructions over and over again, because clearly they're the same for everything on the tapes. So yeah, BMX Kids doesn't even really give you any details for the controls. It just gives you a little overview of the game. Pogo Stick Olympics, it goes on to say there, each event requires you to do different things on the pogo stick, so completely useless really. And loading instructions again, and also some keyboard controls. And finally Skateboard Joust, same sort of thing. You've been challenged to take part in a joust in a low gravity simulation chamber or something like that. It says someone's written the loading points for each of the games, the cassette position if you like, on the things there. So an event, again it says at the bottom there, to load press shift key and run stop together. It's like, why put the loading instructions on there 4 times over when the loading instructions are exactly the same for all 4 games? It's just really shoddy. And finally, down in the bottom corner here, we've got the copyright information, which does mention Silverbird software. Obviously, they're published by, duplicated by, cover design by Insight Associates Limited from Bristol. What a great job you guys did. And finally, at the bottom there, it says screen pictures show maybe different machine versions of the game, although I think actually all the ones on the back cover are the Commodore 64 versions. But yeah, really shabby, shoddy packaging, I think. So let's take a look quickly at the 4 games and talk about them. So we'll start with Turbo Boat Simulator. This was a Probe software release, as is Pogo Stick Olympics on this compilation. Pretty poor game all told. You have to move backwards and forwards down a very small river, shooting things and trying to collect packages dropped by a plane, which is supposed to be your ally, and yet sometimes drop bombs which you drive into and explode and kill you. So yeah, not very good game. Sounds pretty good on it, the music's quite nice, the graphics aren't too bad, but the playability is really low, and I gave it a score originally when I first reviewed it of 5.2. So moving on to BMX Kids, as I've already mentioned before when I did the 1, 2, 3 compilation review. It's not a bad game. It's quite hard after the first couple of levels. Graphics and sound pretty decent again. I gave it a score of 7 when I originally reviewed it. It's a bit strange that they've put this on the compilation again. I don't know if they owed the guy that created it a load of money and had to keep releasing it or something like that. It is really strange to put it on yet another compilation, but without a doubt it is the best game on this pack of 4. So we'll move on then to Pogo Stick Olympics, which is definitely the worst game of the 4 on here, and that is a kind of track and field style game but on a pogo stick, and it's pretty much impossible. The first level you can complete, but you can only ever get 553 points as far as I can tell, and the qualifying score is 550, so you're literally through by the skin of your teeth. You bounce along bursting balloons with a spike on your head. You can't control anything other than the height of the pogo stick bounce, which you do by wiggling the joystick, and you press fire to burst the balloons. You then go on to the second stage, which is the hurdles, and it's pretty much impossible. You can't judge the right position to jump over the hurdles without hitting the next one along, and I've never completed that stage. I'm fairly sure it's impossible, but if you had the perseverance to keep trying, then you may get through that onto the later stages. But this game is awful. It's not really got any kind of decent presentation or title screen. The graphics aren't too bad and the music's pretty good as well, but overall, gameplay wise, it's terrible. Pogo Stick Olympics, definitely the worst game on this compilation, and I gave that 4.7 when I originally reviewed it. And finally, Skateboard Joust is another poor game. Basically, you've got to drive around on a skateboard trying to knock off various things off their skateboards to complete each stage. It starts by having Daleks on skateboards and then moves on to bizarrely roast chickens on skateboards, and I've never got past the third stage on this. It's very hard to control your skateboard. You can only kill your enemies when you're off the skateboard, so you have to press fire to jump off the skateboard. There's some power-ups to collect, but they're not very interesting. The best ones are the ones that actually turn the enemies into a static object that you can destroy. But overall, it's really poor. The scoring on it's awful as well. You get like 20 points for completing the first level or something daft like that, so there's really nothing to aim for scoring wise either. Again, it's got quite nice presentation, graphics aren't too bad, it's got reasonable music on the title screen, but it's just completely lacking on the gameplay front, and I gave that a score of 5.5 originally. So that's a quick overview of the 4 games on this compilation. If you want to see more detail about those, you can go back to my reviews that I did when I originally looked at them. For this compilation, you've got to say it's pretty awful. As a last hurrah for the Silverbird range in 1990, it's not a very good way to go out. I wouldn't have called it the Magnum Pack. If you're going to give it a gun reference, then it's more like a water pistol pack. So I'm going to give it some review scores. It's not going to get counted in the final sort of tally for all the games in this series because I don't class it as one of the budget games. I'm not sure what it retailed for. I'm guessing maybe $4.99. We'll get on to whether I thought it was worth that in a minute. But in terms of scores, what I'm doing, like I did with the 1, 2, 3 compilation, is I'm going to give it its own score for packaging, and then all the other scores for presentation, graphics, etc. are going to be averages of the 4 games that are in the pack. So packaging I'm going to give a 5 because I think it's pretty awful. Presentation averaged out at 6, graphics averaged out at 6 too, and sound averaged out at 7, which pretty much sums up what these games are about, which is that they don't look too bad, they sound pretty good, but then we get onto the playability and that averaged out at 4. That gives it a total score of 5.9, which is not worth that sort of score. It's only given that score because sound and graphics wise the games weren't too bad. So as to whether it was worth it, well, I don't know what it retailed at. As I said, I suspect it was probably $4.99, but whatever it retailed at, it wasn't worth it, and I just don't understand why they had the chance to release some of these Silverbird games again in a compilation, and for some reason they chose 3 of the worst games that they ever released in the Silverbird range. So there you go, that's the Magnum Pack. Bit of a curiosity, but I thought it might be of interest to some of you. Let me know your thoughts about this compilation in the video comments, and I'll be back with another video in the near future. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.